Greetings, Old World Explorers. Welcome to another look into the Old World. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look into the Deep South. Try not to get the Delta Blues. And we're going to be looking at Memphis, Tennessee. Now this is going to be an extensive look into everything I could dig up on Memphis, visually. And as you will see as we roll through the video, that Memphis has a lot more to offer than what you might think. And as we roll through the videos, as always, keep an eye out for the basements and the decorations along the tops. All indications that we are looking at evidence of an old world civilization that has been covered up, obscured from our vision. Now it turns out that Memphis is named after the city of Memphis in Egypt, interestingly enough. And you get a lot of those types of correlations in this part of the States, dating back to the Old World. Mirroring of the Old World, possibly, what we call the Old World, and we are coming to realize the Old World existed here on the continent of North America as well. And it's important to take into account the population demographics of a region as we inspect its architecture and infrastructure. Memphis, as you can see here, not a large city. Up until somewhere in the 1900s where it starts to grow up to this 600,000-ish modern day. But our focus is back in here. We're going to be looking at the Civil War, the yellow fever epidemic that took out much of the population, eventually forced 3/4 of the population to move, we are told, although maybe not indicated here so much. And then the rebuilding in this area. So most of the buildings will be in this time period before 100,000 people lived to build this magnificent city. And if you enjoy these videos that I make, please consider subscribing to the channel. I try to upload relatively often on new locations every time. Sometimes we go into other topics. Appreciate a subscription. Like, comments, everything, it all works. Alright, this is the Equitable building. And look, we are pretty far back in time. You can see we're in the horse and buggy. Most of the photos you're going to see are in that time period. And you can see that we have rather large buildings for such a small population, especially a population dealing with war and disease. So right away I think we can safely say we're spotting the holes in the narrative already. Also interesting features this you have on the front of this building. All sorts of interesting windows, shapes, architecture. And Memphis having some high-rises, surprising me, some early high-rises, and some that have all but scrubbed from history. And here we have an example of 3 of them. And you will also notice, as I like to point out in many of my videos, we're looking at this brick cobbling in the streets. And worth a mention is the old Linden natatorium. I could find very little on this except for what we're looking at here. Or very early on in Memphis's time period, they had natatorium, so I thought that'd be interesting to put in there as well. photos apparently from the 1860s, we are told. Very, very faded, of course. Part of the Civil War history, and I'm not a historian by any means, it's just me looking at the Wikipedia write-up, has to do with Memphis being taken over by the ironclads. A very interesting part of the historical narrative, in my opinion, as I suspect the ironclads were probably used as part of the resetting of the realm, resetting of these locations. So I think there's much more to the story. The Union Army, using the ironclads, supposedly taking over the city for much of the Civil War time period. And the population demographics at that time, between 20 and 30,000 during the Civil War. It was very early. Not a lot of people. Yet we have a lot more than meets the eye, I suppose you could say, or more to meet the eye. Here we have the Exchange Building. Magnificent structure, old world, without a doubt. And an early street scene. So this one looking like it's in the 1910s at some point. And the turmoil that the city goes through, post-Civil War even, with the yellow fever. And we are told over 5,000 people are listed as having been taken by the yellow fever in the year of 1878, in just a matter of months. So this is devastating to any city. You would expect definitely a massive halt in the build-up of architecture and the quality of the architecture. We are told most of the professional classes left Memphis at the time, and all that was left were the dirt poor working classes, black and white. Yet what we see as we go through a lot of the visual evidence says otherwise. Also, the explanation for the yellow fever epidemic having to do with lack of sewers in the city, which is also interesting as we look through many of these photographs and we see the curb work, we see the roads, often we'll see vents even. So again, another hole in the narrative, I would suggest. And the city was much more built out than we had been told. Here we have an old fire station. Looking similar to many of the fire stations you see from the old world. But of course, just a visual of what we expect at the time. Mule capital apparently as well. A lot of mules being sold through Memphis. Big part of the industry there, along with cotton and hardwood. But you see here we have fully bricked out streets. And looking very clean as well. And remember, we have a population of about 100,000 once we get into the early 1900s, about 1910. And we've done the math on how many able-bodied working men there would have been at the time. And I think we quickly fall into the realm of not possible according to the numbers we're given and the history we've been given. Mutual Tower. There it is, still standing. Also getting a good old worlder in the foreground here. The Cotton Exchange Building now reminded me quite a bit of the Cotton Exchange Building in Louisiana. New Orleans, Louisiana. Not quite as ornate, but still something special. Also notice we have lower level basement and railed off actually too, so indications of the mud flood having its effects on Memphis. And the courthouse. And some of these, when you see in this format, really had to pull them out of obscurity off of a Memphis history website, but not a lot of other evidence for these structures other than in that collection of photographs. And you have a very typical looking federal building here, one that you might see in many cities across the states. And a very typical looking bank as well, but not fitting of what we are told of the history with the small population, the poverty, the slave narrative coming into play very heavily in Memphis, all tied in with the Civil War. We are told to heavy immigration post-Civil War coming from Irish and German communities. So we have a heavy Catholic influence on the Southern Baptist religions that we typically expect to see in these regions. Here we have the Tri-State Baptist Memorial. There apparently is the middle part, and then there it is built into three. I don't know, is this some sort of deception? It's hard to believe that these were built not at the same time as this. There's also a hospital, Baptist Union. Stonework. A little bit more about the yellow fever epidemic. The Board of Health declared the epidemic at the end having caused over 20,000 deaths and a loss of over 200 million, or nearly 200 million, we are told. Basically, property tax revenues collapsed and the city couldn't make its payment. Lost its city charter and was reclassified by the state legislature as a taxing district from 1878 to 1893. Interesting. And here we have the white coats learning all they can learn at the John Gaston Hospital. They're also saying that the yellow fever epidemic is what sparked the sanitation reform and improvements in the region. Well, that would do it, wouldn't it? This is a hospital as well, 1926. Graduating class from the medical hospital. Found that to be interesting logo. Something sinister about it all, possibly, especially given recent events. And then this, we were told, was the site of a Methodist hospital to be built. Really quite an amazing structure here. Definitely old world looking, looking like something you wouldn't want to tear down to build a hospital, that's for sure. And Hospital St. Joseph's Hospital. So what we're suggesting in the old world research, or what I'm suggesting, is that we are looking at inheritors of architecture, infrastructure, and that these were not necessarily built for the specific purpose we've been told they were built for, but rather inherited, in some cases fixed up, in many cases torn down. And there we have a flood. So, rough goings on in Memphis, according to our historical narrative. Definitely, I think we can allow for a memory wipe on the region and safely say that there can't be all that many that know exactly what went on during that time period. Another sinister looking photograph of the doctors in training. Not finished with the hospitals though. And we have the dome cupola, of course. And we've elevated too from the what looks like the street level down here. Alright, on to a cluster of hotels, the Hotel Claridge. Again, many of these may be looking plain to some of you, but to my eye, I see the arched windows, I see the lower decoration, and I see the upper decoration, and oftentimes we'll see the interior finish. And these are giveaways that they're old world structures. Here we have a rendering of the Francioli Hotel, all but scrubbed from history. Even in the rendering we see an indication of brick streets early on in the narrative, so how does this fit with what we're told happened in Memphis? I would say it doesn't. In this photograph we're looking at the Gayoso Hotel. Very nice, crisp photograph. Really enjoy these ones. Probably early time period, maybe 20s, something like that, just after World War I. But it's such a crisp photo, it's sometimes nice to take a closer look and really marvel at the quality of construction that we have going on here. This is really, it's spectacular, and you can't tell me that in this city of less than 100,000 people that they were adept at building all this in such a manner. It just flies in the face of common sense. But I guess they say common sense is not also common these days either. So, really, really beautiful. Old world. Another hotel, Lerman. You can see the bump outs here. All of the architecture down here. You get a little bit of a sense of the detail, the column work again. Peabody dating back to a very early time period, right? In that yellow fever epidemic timeline was used apparently to house people. Very large structure, especially for a small city in the 1800s. And there's a bit of the interior, in case you thought maybe it was just a barn-looking structure. No expense spared on any of the finish on these buildings as well. Coffered ceilings, column capitals, balconies, fancy chandeliers. None of it making sense according to the narrative of a place that has such a small amount of people and is dealing with all sorts of poverty issues and race issues. Making no sense. The W.M. Len Hotel. Alright, this one is very, very interesting. Here's a Customs House Post Office, we'll see in another photo. This is the Cosset Library. And again, a very crisp photo. And this is showing you the brickwork in the streets and how intricate it is too. They weren't just laying them in there. There was a rhyme and reason to all of this. I don't see any motorized vehicles in this. This is an old photograph, yet we have the fire hydrants and we have the curb work. Curb work looking very old, not looking fresh and new like it should for this time period. And we have some weeping holes down here and the Cosset Library looking like a Romanesque castle. Typical of most places in the States, to be honest with you. They're everywhere. All you have to do is open your eyes. And here just a little look at a couple of ladies enjoying the afternoon, possibly, out in front of the Cosset Library. Interesting story with the Cosset Library as well. And I'll link a bit of that information here. Interesting that they ran out of money to purchase books after the construction of this was completed. Funny part of the narrative. Does this look like a new building to you? Looks like it's been standing for a long time. And here we have a gathering of the principals in the schools, the many schools in Memphis. This is from 1930. So here we have the setters of the narrative. Possibly, all trained in the new narrative, schooled in the new narrative, done quite well for themselves with that new narrative. And now you're noticing the height of many of these structures. And the difficulty surrounding that type of construction. Again, we have the basement windows. Especially in a city that has such a small population, having just faced an epidemic and a civil war. And also having been decertified as a city, basically changed the taxing designation, making very little sense to see structures like this in such an early time period. But they're there, and they're plentiful. And of course there's no shortage of ornamentation on these structures as well. And even the wholesale houses got the arched window facades. Like this is pretty interesting. I know these are sort of photographs / renderings, hard to know exactly what they are sometimes, but they are still giving us an indication of what was there. Livery and stable even having to look like a castle, so forget about any of the planks. Even though they're the hardwood capital, they were exporting all that, and they were using brick and stone and geopolymer type of cements and whatever it was to build their structures in Memphis. Here we have a laundry. 1, 2, 3, 4-story laundry. Ever been to a 4-story laundry before? I like this one. Lowenstein's, we're told it's called. Electric lights, steam elevators, steam heating, private telephones. One of the most complete and modern dry goods houses in the country. And of course, despite the small population and poverty-stricken region, we have no shortage of presence of the secret societies doing their thing, of course helping society move along. Here we have the Scottish Rite Cathedral, and this is the modern-day Masonic Hall, once looking like this, surrounded by buildings like this and this. Sitting all on its own. This one, here we have the East-South Blue Lodge room, and look what we have here. We have a pipe organ. And we also have another pipe organ in the asylum, I suppose it's called. Interesting word for a room in the Masonic Lodge here. And we also have an old depiction of a Masonic temple. Not the same structure, certainly scrubbed from history. Look at the ornamentation on this baby. Really quite something, isn't it? This is a good time for us to take a quick break from the Masonic temples and have a look at the churches in the area.
Put on my blue suede shoes and I boarded the plane. Touchdown in the land of the Delta Blues, in the middle of the pouring rain. W.C. Handy, won't you look down over me? Yeah, I got a first-class ticket, but I'm as blue as a boy can be. Then I'm walking in Memphis, just walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? Saw the ghost of Elvis on Union Avenue, followed him up to the gates of Graceland, and I watched him walk right through. Now security, they did not see him, they just hovered around his tomb. But there's a pretty little thing waiting for the king down in the jungle room. When I was walking in Memphis, I was walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? fish on the table. They've got gospel in the air. And Reverend Green, be glad to see you when you haven't got a prayer. But boy, you got a prayer in Memphis. Muriel plays piano every Friday at the Hollywood, and they brought me down to see her, and they asked me if I would do a little number, and I sang with all my might. She said, tell me, are you a Christian child? And I said, ma'am, I am tonight. Walking in Memphis, was walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? Walking in Memphis, I was walking with my feet 10 feet off a beam. Walking in Memphis, but do I really feel the way I feel? Put on my blue suede shoes and I boarded the plane. Touchdown.
And of course we had to have the banks like we always do here. I like this one because it's giving us a good idea of the interior of what this looks like and how done up, I suppose you could say, it is. Police station. Again, early time period, horse and buggy. Check out the curbs, fire hydrants. All new infrastructure, we are told, haven't been put in place after the epidemic. And this would be the post office customs house sitting right next to the Cosset Library. And I think we may have seen that in a previous one. It was, or maybe not yet. It was called the Federal Building. We'll have to put it side by side, and we'll have a look. And there, now I'll show you a series of residences in the area. I want you to take note of a lot of the particulars, such as the lower windows, the ornamentation, the rooftops, Antiquitech rooftops. I also have some stonework here, elevated yards and stonework. Castle, of course. Possibly having had a dome or a spire removed here. This is often the case. And you have a lot of these conical domes going on these residences here. Even on the more, what you might call, humble looking residences. Old retail furniture store, just a rendering, but again giving you an indication of how ornate these early buildings were. Many of the buildings we looking a lot more plain, still retaining the arch windows, but often having a lot of the ornamentation removed. So maybe there is definitely a dumbing down of these structures of the old world. This is the Stewart Hall, picture taken in 1899. Now here's a look at the front entrance of this high school, Central High School. I thought this is an interesting photograph, giving you a sense of the permanence of the structure. Yet another high school, this would be the East High School, but still adorned with the columns. Yeah, interesting. There it is, modern day. All sorts of trouble going on out front, it looks like. This is an old high school. You see the stonework. One of the medical colleges. Another. And there's that high school again, a bit better photograph. And we have a St. Mary's School and Chapel. Catholic narrative says the Irish and the German coming over, populating the city. That narrative repeats itself in so many cities I've looked at as well. I have to ask the question, how many Irish and German came over and populated America in the late 1800s? And does it get to a point where the narrative is unbelievable and it's just not possible for those numbers to make sense? I don't think it takes long before we get to that point. It's part of the old university. Just a list or a compilation of the public schools you would have seen in early Memphis. Look at this one. What's that? Not quite across, is it? Yeah. So, fancy schools. All right. Well, here we have a. Here, let's get to this one first. This is the Shrine Building. Alright, this is housing the Alchemia Temple, another name for that shrine building, and this would be the Shriners or secret society folks that were members of that club. Here they are standing in front of the library. Strange photograph, this one. Oriental band, it's almost a mockery. Maybe not almost. Got a face covering here, it's interesting. Goofy looking bunch, that's for sure. Strange part of the historical narrative. We have a marching band, look like. Interior shot of this temple. So again, the level of finishing off the charts. Nothing we do these days can really hold a candle to the level of finishing we see in these buildings. And again, a very early time period, so Memphis of 100,000 people responsible for constructing this, we are told. And it's a two-hump camel for you. At the zoo. Alright, this is the Steric building. Still stands. Looking really, really amazing in this postcard. But certainly it's a photograph turned into a postcard. And here's some shots of what we're looking at modern day. Still looking really amazing and in very, very good shape. Very detailed. Oh, I like this one. This is a proposed skyscraper, we're told, was never built in Memphis. Looking very narrow and strange looking. But often is the case with these. What I think is going on is we're being deceived, and it's possible that a structure like this did exist. And you have you have what looks to me like a docking station for an airship, and then an exit point for the airship. So, I don't know, what do you think? Was this a real structure? Or just proposed? It could have been just proposed, but I thought it helpful to add to this list. And since we don't have enough clubs in Memphis, here we have the Tennessee Club building. Screaming old world at us. If you can't see it when looking at a structure like this, I don't know what to tell you, folks. You go on believing whatever you're told, I suppose. if you don't think there's more to the story. This is really something else. Look at this. It's built right into that corner. Here we have a door going down. And a door going up. Basement windows. And it's giving us a good look at the street as well. Notice how deep the curb is here. And then we have this brick work coming up to meet the brickwork up here. And we have a much shorter curb. This also looking like a topping over an old curb, old infrastructure, and a lot of cover-up going on here, I think. That's the Tennessee Club. Magnificent. Okay, we're getting close to the end of the file here. I'll bring you everything I have. About 20 more photos for you. This is a nice little glimpse into the Memphis, the rail car Memphis, early automobile era. So, of course, the streetcar narrative, as always, a large part of the history of Memphis. Alright, let's look at the Lyceum Theater. One of several theaters. So, again, let's think of the population demographics and what occurred in Memphis in the late 1800s. And let's try to fit that in with what we're about to look at, with the number of theaters and culture that would have had to exist here to justify that. Now this is also the Lyceum, so we have two Lyceums. A little confusing, of course. Here we have the Lyric Theater. Maybe not looking like much at first glance, but you can see the ornamentation here and here. Here we have the Grand Opera House. Memphis having a Grand Opera House. How far back in time is that going? And all I could really find on this is that it was purchased by a John D. Hopkins in 1899, and then renovated, opened in the early 19s. So this is going way back into Memphis history. And there's a better look at it. Old World Beauty, to be sure. Here we have the Princess Theater, because there weren't enough theaters to satiate the appetite of the people of Memphis. Remember, again, the narrative telling us much of the professional class leaving Memphis, leaving only poverty-stricken whites and blacks for the most part, until, of course, the heavy repopulation takes hold in the early 1900s. But I don't know, the theater narrative not holding water as far as I'm concerned. Series of train stations. This is the Calhoun Street train station, and we have a nice photograph of a rail car. I just like to include these, giving you a sense of age here. A remnant of the old world, I would suggest. Here's the Central Station. Possibly some renovation work having gone on here. Hard to tell. We have old world ornamentation. Odd looking building though. It's the shape of it. And another train station. This from 1910. There's that brickwork again, but looking very muddy. Mudded over brick, which I would say is par for the course in many of these old world photographs. There's the two depots, north and south. Also another train terminal station. Heavy ornamentation at the top here. Definitely a bit of a mud flood look going down here where we have barely any window. A little more window going down to full windows. So, previous structure. Old world. Good chance. Union Station. Not quite so spectacular as the Columbus Union Station, but still a jaw dropper. And as we approach the end of the line here, I hope you can appreciate the difference between the historical narrative and what we're seeing with our eyes here, with the visual evidence, much of which has been destroyed over time, obscured, made difficult to find. Here we have a YMCA. I don't know, how many YMCAs do you know need to be built in such a manner? Well, if you look at the YMCAs across the country, you'll find many of them are built in such a manner. Okay, this has been an in-depth look at Memphis, Tennessee. I hope you enjoyed the visuals, and I thank you for joining me.